Okay, take two. Good morning and welcome, and thanks for joining us. This is another one of our Roper St. Francis Health Alliance COVID-19 town halls for December 2020. Just to orient you folks, this is an interactive session with a couple of panelists who will be talking about a topic. We will have the availability to chat questions. So if you're on the WebEx and you have the ability to chat, feel free to chime in with questions or concerns. Another piece of business, this is available for CME, for clinicians who want to get CME. So if you listen to the WebEx and send an email to melissa.mcguire@rsfh.com, and just attest to the fact that you listened, please add any practice changing items that you might think that you will employ based on what you hear, and put your name down as you wish to appear on your certificate. Make sure we have a good email address for you, and we'll get you some CME. And for those who can't stay for the entirety or are interested in other topics, we have these curated on the Roper St. Francis Health Alliance webpage. So if you look back there, there are about 5 or 6 of these with different topics over the course of this pandemic. So take a moment and take a look. But we have a lot to talk about this morning, so I want to hop in and introduce our two guests. These guys are both great resources to our patients and our
I don't recognize
community.
either of those guys.
I know, that's right. Are you seeing I can't see the WebEx. Are you seeing your pictures? I think these were prom photos.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, guys. Nice corsage, Kent. So
from 1972.
Yeah, exactly. But both of these guys, you guys, folks on the call are probably well familiar with both Dr. Kent Stock and Dan Ray, infectious disease specialists in the area. Kent's with Low Country Infectious Diseases. Dan is the Director of Infection Prevention for Roper St. Francis Healthcare. Both of these folks have been fantastic for the entirety of the COVID pandemic and really have helped out considerably, and are willing to talk a little bit about some of the things that are sort of burning issues as December rolls around, which is vaccine development, deployment, and what can we expect from the vaccines, and how are we going to deploy those? So I guess I'd like to start off with just sort of getting a lay of the land and understanding, what do we have in the pipeline? How many vaccines are there, and the types of vaccines that are in development? I know we got Pfizer coming out, Moderna, recent news about AstraZeneca, Oxford vaccine. What do we have? Dan, do you want to start?
Well, I think the count actually seems to be changing, but I know there's in excess of 36 vaccines in the pipeline. I think maybe in the low 40s as far as all the vaccines that are out there in production. Of course, they're really 3 chief players on the near horizon. But as I've looked out over the ones that are in development, it's a broad array of different vaccine delivery vehicles. Everybody knows about Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna, and I think Pfizer BioNTech is supposed to be evaluated by the vaccine board today, and then Moderna is supposed to be coming forward for possible approval next week. And those are both mRNA vaccines, which is in a sense almost a totally new vaccine vehicle. in regards to having had a deployed vaccine before. They've been largely research based in the past, although I think there's one for maybe Ebola um, that's been approved by some bodies. But and then the AstraZeneca vaccine, which I think is on the near horizon, that's an adenovirus vaccine. It's a chimpanzee-derived adenovirus vaccine, I think, which again is another sort of a new vaccine vehicle. But then there are also a lot more, more traditional vaccine vehicles that are out in development, but considerably farther behind, including a number of inactivated vaccine candidates. There are uh, vaccines that are being developed for delivery through vesicular stomatitis virus, various different types. Some of them that I've looked at, and there's not a lot of data. There's not a lot of information available on these that are in the pipeline. Some of them seem to be playing the long game. Whereas Pfizer and Moderna, they're playing the short game. They're trying to get a vaccine out very quickly that can be deployed. But a number of the candidates that are being developed are really seem to be looking at the long game in regards to products that might be more acceptable for deployment in various places or more acceptable to people who don't want to get shots. For instance, there are a number of oral vaccines that are out being developed. There are a few that are being developed that might be administered through patches. There are some that are being developed as intranasal vaccines, and they don't even have timelines for delivery until late into next year. So I think some of the vaccines that are actually in development are sort of playing the long game and anticipating that COVID, may become an endemic seasonal virus in the population, even long after we get deployment of these newer vaccines.
I'd like to talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of like, so it sounds like we've got a full plate of vaccines, and a lot of them, some of the newer technologies are coming out immediately. And so I guess that's one of the things I think we need to sort of dive into is just like, okay, we've got, we described the virus about a year ago, and then within a year, we have a vaccine with a new technology. And I think that has a lot of people sort of scratching their heads or rubbing their chin. Can you tell me how does an mRNA vaccine work? What's the technology, and why would we want to use something that's new like that as opposed to more traditional vaccine delivery methods?
Sure. One quick thing for all those listening, the best resource I've actually found in terms of COVID-19 vaccine development is the New York Times website. They actually have a COVID-19 vaccine tracker, and it's updated almost daily as far as all of the three major types of vaccines, whether they're genetic, viral vector, or protein-based vaccines. So if anybody's interested, you can see the wide variety of vaccines. There's actually over 200 in development and at least 13 in phase 3 trials currently. The messenger RNA is actually not new. To some degree, we've experienced a little bit of serendipity. The DNA-based vaccines began in the 90s when I was actually a research fellow. Most people were focused on viral vector vaccines as the wave of the future, but we found that basically injecting DNA directly into people was not only highly immunogenic, but was capable of producing viral proteins that were relevant to vaccine effectiveness. The messenger RNA has actually been in the works for over 10 years. It's been utilized in the development of Zika, Ebola, and even CMV vaccines. But of course, they haven't been subject to the constraints of a pandemic, so the process has been a very slow one. And at this point, there's no licensed mRNA vaccines out there. There's several reasons why messenger RNA is very attractive. And the first and foremost thing is the messenger RNA is very easy to manufacture. So when you look at conventional vaccine development, especially when you look at our influenza track history where they were looking at chick eggs, embryos, and things of that nature to try and produce vaccine. We've run the gamut of different types of manufacturing cycles, but we've found that the DNA-based vaccines can be much more efficiently manufactured and ultimately distributed to the population at large. But messenger RNA basically instructs the cells to produce viral proteins. And in this case, we're instructing it to produce the spike protein, which is characteristic of SARS-CoV-2. The risk is that messenger RNA can be degraded by enzymes. And so the unique element of this from Pfizer and the German company BioNTech is they were actually able to package it in a lipid nanoparticle. And that lipid nanoparticle prevents enzymatic destruction and allows the messenger RNA to basically reproduce viral proteins in muscle cells. It's injected directly into the muscle. And of interest, it never actually enters the host nucleus. The viral proteins are actually translated by ribosomes in the cytoplasm itself. And it seems to be a very efficient process. The largest question is the durability. You know, how long? We know from the Moderna data, which was recently released, that the antibody production seems to be fairly vigorous for at least 3 months to this point in time. The downside is that we don't know a lot about the intermediate and long-term side effects relevant to messenger RNA. You've heard a lot about the side effects from the standpoint of injection site or febrile reactions. That's because of the immunogenicity of the mRNA construct. But there are some concerns that messenger RNA can induce type 1 interferon response and trigger autoimmunity. So it could serve as an autoantigen, and in some people, there may be risk of development of like autoimmune type diseases. There is some studies in which they've seen edema or blood congestion from the extracellular RNA and actually thrombus development. And then there is actually another hypothetical risk in which the messenger RNA can potentially augment the respiratory disease in individuals via an antibody-dependent enhancement where these subneutralizing antibodies do not completely neutralize the viral particles, but actually increase their enhanced uptake. And you can actually see an increase in disease rather than the protection that we are after, obviously. So very encouraging in terms of the efficacy. They hit it out of the ballpark with the 90+ results that we've seen with the genetic-based vaccines. The J&J, the AstraZeneca, even the Russian Sputnik are viral vector vaccines. And so the data on those things is still being produced.
So, and this is a question that's come up just for folks who may be joining. So the mRNA is not really incorporated into the say the host DNA, the nucleus. mRNA is one of those things that transcribes DNA nuclear material, sends instructions to ribosomes to produce protein. So I guess people were concerned about genetic alteration. That's not what we're postulating. That's not the way this works. It basically provides instructions to cells to produce proteins extranucleically, so to speak. right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And, in terms of some of the logistical concerns for mRNA vaccines, I know the Pfizer vaccine has the lipid nanoparticle covering, and I guess that's one of the reasons why it requires such ultra cold storage. Is that right, guys?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it just, and so are all mRNA vaccines going to be the same way? Are they all going to be delivered as far as you guys know? Is this one of those things that we're going to have to work through, sort of the cold storage supply chain process for all of the early vaccines, or at least the mRNA vaccines?
Well, there are some other mRNA vaccines that are under development. I'll defer to you, Kent, but I haven't seen enough information on the others to know if they might have any significant advantage in regards to storage and distribution compared to the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. I would anticipate that these vaccines are going to present more of, logistical considerations in regards to distribution, just because, as Kent pointed out, mRNA by nature is a very fragile molecule and degrades very quickly, which I think is actually, part of the advantage of these vaccines. People have asked me several times over the past couple of weeks, they've come up to me and said, "Hey, are you going to get the vaccine?" And, my simple response to that is absolutely yes. I'll be right there in line. And, the more involved response is, well, which vaccine would you really want to get? The mRNA vaccines are kind of new players on the block in regards that we haven't had them put out into the population in large numbers. And to be honest, I was a little bit skeptical when I first started looking at the vaccine candidates, but I've actually become a fan of these vaccines simply as much as anything else because of the proposed delivery and the fact that these introduced molecules aren't going to stay around very long. Kent, very meticulously outlined some of the theoretical concerns around the vaccines and, in infectious disease over decades. You become familiar with some of the accidents associated with vaccines, a lot of which, most catastrophically have to do with autoimmunity and molecular mimicry. So the fact that these introduced molecules are not going to be around very long, aren't going to be introduced into the nucleus of the cell, and it's actually very reassuring to me that most of this process is actually going on in muscle cells, makes them very attractive candidates to me, even though we don't have quite the track record with them. So I don't know that all of the mRNA vaccines in development are going to present these same challenges. But I do expect that I anticipate they will be more difficult to deploy in other parts of the world that don't have the kind of resources we have for our healthcare. Pfizer is the one that actually seems to be the most problematic. I think probably most everybody is aware of that, because for long-term storage, that needs to be stored in like a -80 freezer, which, when I was a fellow, we had -80 freezers and they were always packed to the gills, but, they had to be monitored on a continuous basis, and they were difficult to get in and out, and you had to be very quick about it. You usually were pulling out, trying to plan your day so you could pull stuff out once a day without going into the freezer again. And they're sort of big, bulky things that you're not likely to have. I don't think you're likely to have it in your clinic, Bob, but, you tell me about that. There is along the way.
I can barely keep. I can barely keep milk fresh, so we do not have it.
There does seem to be, a sort of de-escalating chain of storage that could maybe be adapted to practical delivery in the clinic. But Moderna has some advantages in regards there, in that it can be, stored for some fairly long-term periods in a regular freezer. So it definitely seems to me like there's going to need to be infrastructure built, and I suppose the federal government is in the process of building that in association with CVS and Walgreens. But it certainly doesn't seem like anything that couldn't be handled by our health infrastructure. What do you have to say about that, Kent?
No, my understanding with the messenger RNA or even all of the DNA-based vaccines, there will be some refrigeration required for storage, but obviously different magnitudes. So I suspect all of them to some degree. My understanding is Pfizer has created portable -7-degree freezers that will allow distribution to rural hospitals, areas where people may not have access to institutions that have these things full time. The one point I did want to make as well, if anybody's interested, the FDA did publicly release the the Pfizer data. So if you care to read the 50-odd page report, it's available for folks. But the one thing you got to keep in mind with these vaccines is they have been shown to be in excess of 90% effective in preventing disease, not infection. We do not know actually how effective they are at preventing infection. The goal is obviously preventing disease, but the studies were not designed to actually assess how many individuals in the treatment arm actually got infected, but did not develop any symptoms. And with 40 to 45% of people being asymptomatic carriers, time will tell whether or not the vaccines are actually beneficial in this regard. So there's the possibility you could have infections still spreading, but those at greatest risk will obviously not develop significant disease, which is clearly a major win from vaccine development standpoint. But the sense that we may see zero transmission anytime soon is something to be determined. So that's just the point I wanted to make to everybody.
Yeah. On the other hand, intuitive. Oh.
So don't get a false sense of security that if you get the vaccine, you may still end up being an asymptomatic carrier. Masks are still going to be important. All the regular things that we've talked about over and over again are still going to be operational even after you get the vaccine.
Well, it depends. If you have a vaccine that's in excess of 90% effective, in order to achieve herd immunity, you have to vaccinate 54 to 72% of the population. And so obviously that's our goal to do that in the next, 6 months. The uncertainty is obviously how effective it is at preventing infection, because if you vaccinate in a staggered approach and you're preventing disease, which is obviously our primary goal, the question is how effective the virus can still transmit itself within pockets of the world that may not have access to the vaccine, or obviously may only partially be vaccinated. So it may ultimately be that even after June comes along and everybody's vaccinated, that we still have to mitigate for 3 to 6 months thereafter to see whether transmission is continuing to occur or it has come to a complete halt. The hope is that the data will show that infection is also markedly reduced, but the studies weren't designed to do that. So at this point, we don't know that.
And of course, we're talking about the vaccine as if there's really only one, or really only one type. We're sort of focusing on the Pfizer and Moderna mRNA vaccines, but the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is out there on the near horizon. And of course, there's actually a U.S. arm of those trials that is ongoing that has been a little bit delayed. That's going to have a place, obviously, in vaccination across the world, and therefore a role in stemming the pandemic. What role it's going to have in the United States, I think, is certainly right now up in the air. I do know that the federal government is contracted to purchase actually more doses of that vaccine than either of the mRNA vaccines currently. But what we're going to do with it and how that's going to fit in, particularly given the lower efficacy, is unknown right now.
And that brings up a good point, because I want to go into sort of process. How do these vaccines become evaluated? What's the approval process? I mean, are we talking emergency use authorization? Is this FDA approved for widespread delivery? But in terms of how we've gone through all the way through phase 3 clinical trials within a year. How confident are you guys about the data that we've gotten, and how are we going to be looking at long-term side effects? Kent?
Well, that's a great question. When you look at the traditional process, all of this falls under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And in 2013, there was a corollary. It's a long, name, but it effectively addressed pandemics and all hazards. And this was coming on the heels of Ebola outbreaks, SARS-1 and MERS, the H1N1 influenza. So the government actually, in its foresight, created a corollary which was an attempt to remove the bureaucracy to get medicines or medical products to the population at large in a more expedited fashion. The reason why EUA has become a trite term currently is because of the current pandemic, and the FDA is reviewing Pfizer tomorrow on the 10th and Moderna on the 17th, and that's for EUAs. Obviously, there's public pressure because the UK has already approved the Pfizer product, and many of you saw the first 90-year-old woman receive the dose in the outpatient setting a couple nights ago, illustrating their effort. But the EUA will, if it is approved, will issue criteria similar to we see with remdesivir. And obviously, the CDC is setting the priorities as far as who should receive the vaccine first. But the safety monitoring, to some degree, is individual or institutional responsibility. In the beginning with remdesivir, we had to get DHEC approval or oversight for every dose that we released. It soon got so cumbersome for DHEC that they eventually, deferred to the institution. And so with the vaccine, once the guidelines are set, it'll be up to MUSC as the regional distributor, and then the sub-distributors like Roper St. Francis to make sure that the individuals receiving the designated vaccine meet the criteria, and then ultimately that there is some sort of oversight or self-reporting as far as potential side effects. But until it's formally FDA approved, it is a little bit of the wild, wild west under the EUA designation, and it is going to be a little challenging as far as the logistics, because remember, you're going to get 2 shots, within 3 weeks, and they're probably going to have to stagger them because of the side effects, which may prompt people to miss work the next day. So that's for people like yourself, Bob, and MUSC and DHEC. One of my partners is on the task force at DHEC who's responsible for oversight in this regard, Joe John. And it's going to be a very Herculean effort to try and ensure that not only is it distributed in an efficient and appropriate manner, but that safety is also being properly monitored.
Yeah, I got the impression, Bob. I'm sorry. I got the impression from your question that maybe part of your question was how reliably has the process been followed? I think that's kind of the question that I've been getting from people lately is, should I trust the process? Was that part of your
Yeah, and again, I mean, that's the other issue is, are you guys concerned about speed to market? Do you guys feel like we're, are we missing steps? Are we sort of rushing through side effect profiles and to get to market? And again, understanding that, like Kent said, I mean, this is EUA, all rules are off, sort of. And so, it's odd. I've never dealt with anything like this. I mean, we all have experience with flu vaccines. We all have experience with serial vaccines. But something like this, where you just don't know what the side effect profile may be, or any long-term risks. I mean, I think a lot of folks are wondering how, if we get this out, how are we getting all this data, and who's collating, and who's going to publish? Is this all sort of, is this state, federal, the drug companies themselves?
Well, obviously there are going to be risks associated with it. Obviously, it's just a question of defining what sort of risk profile you're comfortable with living with. One of the things that I think is a concern for vaccinologists is, my favorite test to order is the test of time. It's just you can't get that. You can't order that in Cerner. And we're not going to get that. For the vaccine folks, I think that's a big concern for them, that we're not going to have the ability to look for long-term rare side effects that might show up over time, and it's anticipated that there might be a few of those. I think in an attempt to try to get around that restriction, you can try to use, trying to do vaccine studies over the short term, you can increase your numbers. And I think it is sort of reassuring with some of the numbers, particularly in regards to the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, and that I think the Pfizer vaccine has upwards of 40,000 people in the trial at this point, and the Moderna vaccine has upwards of 30,000 people in the trial at this point. Now, they don't have even short-term follow-up on all of those people, but they do have significant numbers. There's significantly smaller numbers in the AstraZeneca trial up to this point, but I think those numbers for the two mRNA vaccines are actually reassuring. We just can't, even with large numbers, offset the benefit of having long-term follow-up on these vaccines. But I think that's reassuring that there is safety in the trials as it's been done to this point. Now, we don't have the actual data sitting in hand, and I haven't actually looked at the Pfizer publication that Kent just referred to, but we don't have all the ugly, bumps and wrinkles in the data that all the regulatory bodies are going to have. So I think at some point we have to refer back to these regulatory bodies that we've constructed to take care of us, over decades. And the ACIP, the people who are actually reviewing the two products over the next week, they are appointed by DHSS, but these are, they're physicians, scientists, and vaccinologists. They're not political appointees per se. They're people with actual experience and credibility. Personally, I trust those bodies. I trust them to act like scientists. So I'm placing my trust there, and I'll be, one of the first ones in line to get the vaccine as soon as they, tell me I should get it. Kent, what's your view on that?
Well, I think, all I know is the FDA application went public yesterday, and individuals like Mike Sogg from UAB, Barney Graham, who is my mentor and heads the clinical trials division at NIH, came out publicly and were very, very impressed. I mean, as you said, safety is a big fat unknown in terms of intermediate, long-term side effects, but I think the efficacy was tremendous. They were hoping for 50 to 60%. They've gotten in excess of 90. I think the short-term side effects people are very comfortable with. And so you're seeing leaders in the profession, even before the review tomorrow, come out and provide some measure of reassurance to people like myself who don't know enough about this process and ultimately some of these DNA-based vaccine constructs and what the real risks are, at least, you know, providing some reassurance. So I see that as a very positive thing. There is definitely politics playing a role in the FDA. We all know that from the recent monoclonal antibody experience, but it is what it is, and I do believe that the circumstances demand that we expedite this process and we place our faith and trust in people, like Dan said, that are all obviously looking out for our best interests.
What do you guys think about the special populations in terms of, right now this is 18 and older, and you know, in terms of guidance for children, pregnant or breastfeeding moms, immunocompromised. What do you guys think about when are we going to hear anything about that, or is this something that we're just going to have to put on the back burner for now?
The Pfizer application, I think, went down to 12 years old. Moderna's 18 and above. I think that's a complicated question, to be honest. Particularly in regards to kids. I mean, the one of the issues in regards to kids and vaccines isn't just do they respond to the vaccine as well as younger adults versus older adults. Kids just respond to vaccines in a totally different manner. It's just not the same immune system. So to say we'll put a vaccine into kids and just see what their antibody responses, mean geometric titer looks like or whatever is a complicated question. Those studies need to be done, and I'm pretty sure that Pfizer at least has a pediatric arm that they're starting or started. I don't know about Moderna.
Yeah, Pfizer did file a request to begin studies in pediatrics, so you're right. That those trials are, ongoing.
Mm-hmm. I don't know when we'll have to. Go ahead.
For pregnant or breastfeeding, is guidance left up to sort of a relative, risk-benefit ratio analysis? Is that, or is there any guidance about that?
The EUA will determine that. I think the data doesn't exist in those populations, and so part of the EUA will be to review the existing data and then make recommendations on special populations. Same way they're going to make recommendations on preferred groups that should get it. They're going to basically include exclusion criteria, at least based on potential risks or inadequate data, I would think. So I suspect we'll hear tomorrow once we get more information from the EUA review.
Gotcha. Let's talk a little bit about what we know about folks who've gotten the vaccine. Thus far, we know it's remarkably effective. We've also heard reports about reactogenicity or immediate side effects. Kent, you want to talk a little bit about that? And you'd mentioned earlier some of the logistic concerns that accompany, the reactogenicity from particularly, I guess, the Pfizer vaccine was the one that I've heard a lot about, particularly on the second dose.
Yeah, the DNA-based vaccines, because they're immunogenic, which is obviously a good thing, you tend to see more injection site or constitutional symptoms as a byproduct of the vaccination. With the second dose, 40 to 60% of people with the Pfizer product did get fevers, myalgias, injection site pain and swelling. So there's no doubt that there will be some side effects. We do have to plan for paid time off that, if we give first responders the initial round, that probably there will be some folks who will miss work the next day. So that's something, obviously, administration will have to factor in as we work through the appropriate candidates for the initial round. It is a little bit like the Nike saying, no pain, no gain. But we're all going to have to line up. I mean, this is something we got to do for the greater good of society, to save lives and to return to normalcy as we know it. We're all tired of not being able to go to basketball games and go to good restaurants and sit down and enjoy a glass of wine and a good dinner. And so I think if people are hesitant in their effort to get the vaccine, it is going to accomplish far less than we hope. So it is what it is. The intermediate long-term side effects, we just simply don't know. The immunity looks promising. The Moderna data, at least at 3 months out, shows very vigorous neutralizing antibody development, at least for 3 months out, but the longitudinal studies are obviously in progress. So we anticipate that the immune response will be at least in excess of a year, but how long we don't ultimately know.
We have a question about, we talked about special populations, immune compromised. Have you guys heard anything about folks with autoimmune disorders?
In regards to vaccination of these individuals?
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything specific. Have you, Kent?
No, nothing at all.
Yeah. I think a lot of the questions about special populations are going to be exactly what Kent sort of outlined. Is they may come out in the EUA. I think we're going to get pretty clear direction as to who gets vaccinated and what populations, particularly when we're talking about phase 1 vaccination with limited supply. But when it comes to all these sort of questions about special populations, this is going to be tough.
Mm-hmm.
What about, and we heard President-elect Biden say yesterday, I guess it was, that his plan is to get 100 million doses in 100 days, and setting that as a goal. What does success look like? I mean, how would you guys measure success? Are we talking herd immunity, number of doses? I mean, South Carolina's going to get like 200 to 300,000 doses.
Yeah.
How far along does that get us to, like Ken says, a return to normalcy?
Well, I mean, 300,000 doses that's about 6% of the population of our state. So, yeah.
Still got a long way to go.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, and Pfizer recently downgraded its production estimates by 50%. So it's going to be a bigger hurdle than I think most of the public health officials have indicated. I mean, I think you've seen from Fauci, he's revised his estimates from the end of April to now June. Obviously, there's already infighting about the haves and the have-nots, who has money, who has guaranteed themselves distribution based on payment in advance versus developing parts of the world. So there is going to be a lot of logistical issues to accomplish the goal. And success will simply be measured in terms of zero transmission. When this thing comes to a halt, that's really the ultimate measure of success.
Although I think, they're going to be hallmarks along the way, even if, you pointed this out, that beyond just vaccination conferring a lack of acquisition of disease, it's certainly going to moderate disease in the people who do become infected in regards to decreasing their amount of shedding, and intuitively should have some impact on spread. But also, I think one of the more encouraging outcomes from the Pfizer and the Moderna data that's out there is its impact on severity of disease. So it definitely seems to decrease the number of people who have severe disease, even among those who get infected. And we've seen that before in vaccines, so it's kind of expected. The numbers are small, but that could go a long way, I think. Even in the absence of complete vaccination of the population, could go a long way in regards to offloading some of the burden that we have on the healthcare industry right now, and particularly hospitals.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of questions about sort of, closer to home, how are we going to, number one, get the vaccine? How many doses do you think the Roper system will get? And, our plans to sort of roll out the vaccine. I know, Dan, you've been involved in the vaccine task force where we've been talking about that and sort of planning the logistical, cold storage chain. And our distribution chain. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? DHEC announces that they've got 200 to 300,000 vaccines, and that's great. But how do you get it from DHEC into somebody's arm? And how are we going about doing that?
Yeah, and to be honest, I can't speak to that very well. As Kent, mentioned earlier, we anticipate it's not gonna be coming directly from DHEC to Roper. But I don't know that the mechanics of delivery have actually been fleshed out completely. Kent, do you know any more about that?
Well, the paper obviously said, as Bob did, the state is projected to get 200 to 300,000. Joe John on the task force indicated that they still have to make decisions as far as, based on the amount they get, how they distribute it to first responders and nursing home residents. I think there's something like 12,000, at least 12,000 nursing home residents, or something like that they have to factor in. And how are they going to distribute it based on demographics is what my understanding was, not based on COVID cases. Terry Steyer is on this medical advisory board with me at Porter Goud. He's the chair of family medicine at MUSC, and MUSC has obviously been designated by DHEC to be the regional provider for the vaccine, and will work through the hospital systems primarily, although my understanding is they are going to utilize the private organizations, potentially Fetter Clinic, Palmetto Primary Care, some of the other larger healthcare providers that are non-hospital based to distribute. But, how that's actually going to be done, will they bring that to us and we will set up tents and it's up to Roper to, do their own, or does everybody have to go to a single location? I just have no idea. I don't think they know yet, to be very honest with you.
Yeah, we haven't gotten anything specific from DHEC up to this point.
Yeah, I think, the task force is, working on some assumptions, and it's like, what happens if they show up with, a load of vaccine? What do we do? And so that's one of the things that we've been working on in terms of, developing the cold storage and then designating distribution sites that, we would be able to make sure that, once thawed, reconstituted, and ready to inject, we stay within the time frame. We've asked for a sufficient supply to vaccinate all the frontline workers, all of our teammates. Again, it's just one of those things where, we sort of have, plans on paper that look good. We just don't know, what happens before, the vaccine lands on our door, or even if that's the case. So, we're working on the assumption that, this is the way it's going to be distributed, but I don't think anybody really knows that yet.
Yeah, and unfortunately, some of those details are really important.
Yeah. We have a question about mRNA vaccine and basically some of the ramifications of injecting that into muscle, death of myocytes, and then once myocytes die, those contents become antigenic, and they asked about the development of autoimmune disease such as polymyositis, which I think is one of those situations where we probably can't say much about.
Yeah, I really don't. I think that's another one of those potential side effects that we're really going to have to wait until we have enough time and numbers to see if that's an issue, or what the magnitude of the issue is going to be.
I've gotten this question from several folks, and if you think you've had COVID-19 in the past, and you're presented with the choice of vaccination or not vaccinating, what would be the considerations, and does testing antibodies play any role in that?
Well, do you want to talk, Ken, or do you want me to just?
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
My thoughts. I mean, there's a lot we just simply don't know right now. I mean, as the data has come out over the past year in regards to antibody and cellular responses in regards to natural infection with COVID-19, it seems that the data is progressively more and more encouraging in regards to longer lasting immunity than we initially would have anticipated on what we knew about coronaviruses. And I think that's been consistent. Those goalposts have been sort of pushed farther and farther away as we know more about it. How far down the road those goalposts, how far down the road that immunity is going to last is unknown. But it's also not really known how prevalent within the population that gets infected. Will all of those people have similar antibody and cellular responses and be protected for the same duration? So I think part of the decision that's made here is almost philosophical. Are you gonna take the road of being more conservative in your approach and try to do everything you can to protect against the possibilities, or are you going to be a little bit more laissez-faire? I think, the approach of the healthcare industry and regulatory bodies right now is that we should be conservative, and I think that's the right thing to do in regards to just protecting the population and trying to arrest spread. So since we don't know how long immunity is going to last and how robust that might be for the individual, then we probably should continue, even in those who have been infected, known to be infected, should continue to mask and distance until we get control of the pandemic. In regards to vaccination of someone who's been infected and demonstrated serologic conversion, so far, right? So to this point, we don't know that would be dangerous or contraindicated in anybody that they get vaccinated, and I think it's a good idea that they probably should. And then the other issue, as Kent pointed out earlier, just because someone has had infection previously or gets vaccinated, we don't know that confers complete sterilizing immunity and they can't get infected again, or might they get infected, become something of a transmission risk during their presumably short period of viral replication and shedding. So, again, we should continue to mask and distance regardless, I think, of known previous infection and serologic conversion. I think that's the approach that people have recommended as far as regulatory bodies. Personally, I think that's the right way to go. And I think that's the message we should probably continue to give our patients.
What do you think, Kent? Is that anything to add on that, or?
No, it's absolutely right. I mean, prior infection is not a contraindication of vaccination. In fact, Operation Warp Speed has not even taken that into account. They're just, their goal is to immunize everyone and independent of prior infection history. You know, the data about longitudinal immunity is evolving. I mean, some of the Chinese work in which they obviously have the longest experience is very encouraging. I mean, seasonal coronaviruses, the immunity lasts 3 to 4 months, but with SARS-1 and MERS, it was 1 to 3 years. And it looks like the natural immunity to this particular infection will be at least in excess of a year on average. So I think better than expected, but how durable, nobody really knows. And at this point, there's no downside to getting vaccinated in somebody who was previously infected. Reinfections do occur, but fortunately, they're very, 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 very rare.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I think, Bob, you know, maybe in discussion with our individual patients, as far as couching that discussion in an example that people might be more familiar with, you know, people that have shingles, we don't tell them it's a bad idea to get the shingles vaccine.
Yeah, the shingles vaccine, yeah.
Yeah, and we have tons of experience with that.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, and from a system standpoint, the guidance is that, you know, although it's not mandated, it's not say a condition of employment or medical staff privileging, we're recommending strongly that all employees and medical staff and affiliates who would practice within the area get vaccinated, you know, as vaccine supplies allow. I mean, we'll have an internal sort of priority list, so we don't want the ED getting decimated, so we've got to keep them protected. But you know, there's a priority list, and our hope is to vaccinate frontline workers early on, and we would strongly recommend folks who have patient contact get vaccinated. I know there's some reticence in the community about this. I mean, what would you guys tell, say, a friend or a colleague? What have you guys been telling people that have asked you? Because I'm sure it's happened. You know, what do you think? Should I get vaccinated?
Well, I've already told many people that, yeah, they should get vaccinated. What I would not try to do is delegitimize their impression, because I think it's true that there's some risk associated with getting vaccinated. That's to try to deny the validity of that thought, I think just delegitimizes your own views. But to put that in perspective, you know, I mean, right now, I think the risk of walking out of my house and going somewhere unvaccinated exceeds the risk of vaccination on the basis of what we know.
Yeah, what do you think?
I mean, I just think it's a very simple assessment. You know, this is our generation's World War II. And each individual, while obviously has the opportunity to make their own decision, the truth is if we don't do this as a group, if we don't look at it from the benefit of collective society, we're going to fall short of expectations. So I think every individual, whether you work in healthcare or otherwise, needs to step up to the plate and get vaccinated. And yes, there probably will be some downside at some point in time that we identify, but we know how many deaths are occurring. We know how much morbidity is going on, and that doesn't even factor in the economic fallout, the emotional fallout in terms of suicide, depression, the inability to conduct life as we know it within schools, extracurricular activities. So it's a very simple mindset. We have to do it. It's the only way we're going to get beyond this thing, which has proven to be very elusive as a pathogen. And so I think it's something that all of us have as an obligation. There will be exceptions based on immunocompromised status, pregnant women, things like that, and we understand that. But I certainly will step up to the plate, and be one of the first vaccinated, and I will only be a cheerleader for every individual that poses that question to me.
Guys, we've come to the top of the hour. Anything else that any burning issues? Last words that you have before we say goodbye? And anything from you?
No, just thanks for the discussion. It's always good to just kind of get out and talk amongst each other and listen to yourself as you're talking to other folks, and brings up a lot of questions that then you can get answers to from other folks. So thanks for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Hey, Ken, anything?
No, I just want to say how much we appreciate all the help from administration over the past year. I mean, it's been a very, very challenging, 10, 11 months at all levels, whether you're managing inpatients or outpatients. And I really think Roper St. Francis has done an incredible job at providing us with resources, education, and ultimately the personnel to do the job well. And I think, I have great confidence that as this vaccine rolls out, that our administration and physician leaders will get the job done and get the vaccine to the people that need it.
Hey guys, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I know the medical community appreciates you sharing your expertise. One thing I will mention is that as we were concerned that we would not get to new therapies, there are new therapies that Dr. Stock mentioned, particularly monoclonal antibodies. We'll set up another time to talk about those. But at this point, for those of you who are interested in getting CME credit, please make sure you get your information to melissa.mcguire@rsfh.com. And once again, thank you, Kent, Dan, for everything that you're doing, and for everybody out there listening. I know this has been a crazy 2020. Thank you all for, number one, being there every day, and number two, taking the time to actually learn more about what we're doing. It just shows how committed you are to our patients and our community. So once again, we'll be doing more of these as time goes on, and go out and get back to work. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Bye.